American schools begin the process of replacing actual grades with symbols and colors. Muslim families outraged that 4-year-olds are coming home with gay propaganda in their preschools. And Colorado seeks to ban the word abstinence when it comes to the teaching of sex. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Good morning, Vietnam! I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week, Katie and I cover those stories impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses across the world. Greetings to all of our faithful listeners. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and never, ever miss an episode. Make sure you stick around because we're going to have the new coloring book honoring anti-Semite Ilhan Omar coming up a little bit down the road, because that's just what we do. And before we begin the first story, we've, in the interest of sensitivity, Katie, we have instituted here at Freedom Project a new way to evaluate your job performance. Oh. Simply ranking you by what you've actually done and assigning a number, that's now considered passé. So the words I'm going to use to define your job performance. In terms of your punctuality, I'm going to give you an indigo. In terms of your professionalism, mint chocolate chip. And in terms of your overall performance, foliage. Michael Scott's safe word. Okay, and why are we doing this? Because we learned from public schools in America here in our own backyard in Wisconsin, our first story of the day. Area schools here in Winneconne, Neenah, Wisconsin, have replaced traditional grades with colors, numbers, and symbols. Parents are confused after schools move away from A's and B's and C's to target-based grading scales using colors, numbers, or symbols instead of traditional grades. Garth Larson, that's a good Wisconsin Scandinavian name. We need to send them back to Sweden right away. Garth Larson helped Winneconne Neenah school districts develop a target-based grading system. Quote, on a test, a student no longer gets an 88%.
Instead of on a test, a student no longer gets 88%. Instead, they have very clear objectives that they want to accomplish, and they're going to get proficiency-related scores as a result of that.
And the thing that gets me about this is that they're very clear, right? The one thing we know about Common Core and all the related pedagogies and all this garbage stuff that comes with it, the one thing we know is it's unclear. There's not any of it that's even remotely clear. And so much so that a mom, Amber Demarath, who is a parent of a Neenah High School freshman, said,
the scale is confusing and it's difficult to explain. I've had it explained to me multiple times at conferences this year, and I still don't really fully understand it.
They know they can't educate your kids to get A's, what used to be A's. They know they can't educate your kids to grade levels anymore. So rather than admitting that, right, they're going to symbolize all of this somehow, so everybody's confused and everybody thinks their kids are doing great.
And the thing that Garth Larson is doing, he's the one who founded this First Educational Resources as well. So it's his own scam. Also, by the way, a little information for you. He's technically a colleague of yours because he's an adjunct professor as well.
At my university?
At your university.
God help us.
So I never had him. I didn't see him, but he's listed as being an adjunct.
All I got to say is Wayne's World. Excellent. Way to go, Garth.
Anyway, Garth, he presents this as, sometimes the kids just don't get it and they need that second opportunity, which, I mean, I agree. Students aren't going to, you can't expect a student, you teach them and then immediately they're going to get it. You need to help develop them. That's called learning over time. And that's why you have various different methods of being able to assess them and then give them a test at the end. But these kids are so trained to only take these tests that I guess the teachers aren't assessing them throughout so that they feel confident, so that they will, by the time they get to the test, they will understand the material. But no, so instead, we're just going to be like, oh, you didn't get it, have a green.
The whole thing is dishonest because, as Mr. Larson points out, and Amber Demarath points out as well, the mom, that at the end of the year, when it's all said and done, all those colors and symbols and musical notes and stickers and jelly, scratch and jelly beans that the kids have been given will be translated into a grade. Please, as Mrs. Demarath says, well, if you're going to end up giving them a grade anyway, what is the point of the rest of this? It is nothing more than to obfuscate what that grade is going to be. This is what we spend our time and our tax dollars doing. Rather than convincing convincing public schools to reject failed programs like Common Core, to encourage kids to learn actual mastery of subjects. Go back what we've done for 1,000 years, make them memorize their multiplication tables. Make them plan can in terms of doing math in the schools. The ideal is that by the time a kid's a senior, he ought to be potentially ready for calculus. And if you do that, that means that at 2nd grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, you got to do certain things. Have a reading system, not based on color-coded nonsense, but one based on the idea that by the time kids are juniors and seniors in high school, we want them to read the most complicated, best books of Western culture. And if you do that, then you know the kind of books you have to slot along the way. This is nothing more than trying to obfuscate and cover for a system that is not really an educational system anymore.
And to make matters worse, at least in Neenah right now, some of the teachers are using the new system, the color-coded system, and some are using the traditional. So those kids aren't confused at all as to, well, it looks like in English I'm getting a yellow, but in, science I'm getting an 88. So let's put that together and figure out what I'm doing.
And what this means is at the end of the semester, there's going to be basically no accountability, right? No one's going to be able to fail this, right?
Oh, absolutely not,
all the colors, there's going to be no color for F. Right? And there's going to be no color for A. And what's going to happen at the end of the school year is what they'll do is they'll look at what the predetermined outcomes have to be to continue to get their state funding and to continue to get their federal funding. What do we have to score nationally and locally to be able to keep getting all of our money? And then you watch how all those colors and symbols suddenly align beautifully along the spectrum so they get all their cash. That's what this is all about.
We have a story coming out of it's Valley View Elementary School. It's in Pennsylvania, which is just near Scranton, Pennsylvania, your favorite city in the world. And it's a story of a 2nd grader named Camden. Well, Camden took this little math assignment, and he received it back, and the teacher supposedly wrote, absolutely pathetic. He answered 13 in 3 minutes, sad, and then there's a sad face that the teacher supposedly wrote in. So Father Chris Palan posted a photo of this assignment on Facebook with the post saying, my son Camden's teacher has been so rude to him and myself all year. He comes home with this, and I am beyond frustrated that someone would write this on a child's work. Such great motivation.
Well, I have a mixed minds by this. 6-year-olds, we're already exposing 6-year-olds to sex. We're already exposing 7-year-olds. We're all exposed 2nd graders. We're exposing them to sex. We're exposing them to all sorts of complicated transgender issues. We're treating them like adults when it comes to all the different things we're talking to them about. But all of a sudden now, right, a serious comment from a disappointed teacher quashes a whine, right? Give me a break. You can't have it both way, progressives. I guess you can because no one's stopping you. You have the ability to treat our children like adults, pornographically aware adults, but when it comes to the sensitivity of a teacher comment, again, okay, maybe that's a little bit harsh for a 7-year-old, potentially, but if it is conveying something that these colors aren't going to convey, it is conveying from a teacher. Some of the most meaningful comments I ever got for teachers was when they called me out for being a putz, right? And that has happened. That happened routinely, right?
Never.
Look, you're not working. I told my Mrs. Cannelon story to you, right? I'm going to say it again right now because I can. Mrs. Cannelon, I was in 3rd grade. Mrs. Cannelon was the upper middle school math teacher. Our 3rd grade teacher was absent, so we had to go down to her classroom. And so we sat in the back while she taught her math class to the 8th graders. And so we were all terrified because Mrs. Cannelon was a very severe woman with horn-rimmed glasses, and she would always be grading papers, and she would never look, but she could always hear you. So wherever you were in the room, she could hear you. And I remember I was sitting in the back of the room, and all of a sudden she interrupted her 8th grade math class, and she said, Mr. Pesta, come here immediately and bring that book. Oh, no. And I think I wet myself 6 times by the time I got to the back of the room to the front of the room. And I stood before her desk, and I was such a tiny little guy, and she was looking down at me while she was seated with her horn-rimmed glasses. And she said to me, Mr. Pesta, I would assume that somebody with an 11th grade reading level would be reading better books than Beezus and Ramona. Now that's pretty harsh, right? I was reading my Beezus and Ramona in the back of the classroom, right? Probably because I went for the How the Grinch Stole Christmas. That was the book I always read in 3rd grade, and it was somebody else had it checked out. But she pointed out something. She had seen my test scores, and she said to me, I'm disappointed in you. You should be reading better books. And I put away, and I haven't read Beezus and Ramona since, and I read better books. And so that was the best criticism I've ever got, however harshly delivered.
If you would like to have a weekly story by Dr. Duke of his, elementary days, let us know in the comments below.
Story time with Dr. Duke. Hey, it'd be a lot better than the transgender garbage, the transvestites reading, the pedophile transvestites who are reading books to your kids in Houston.
That is true. Now, back on track here for a moment. Good story, though. I teared a little. I didn't wet myself, but I teared a little. Well, the post that Chris Palan put out went viral, of course, because everyone has an opinion about it. Thousands of signatures have been put onto a petition to fire the teacher, who's named Alyssa Rupp Bohannik. And it's, some people are, I mean, obviously they want her fired, but then there are the counter people who say, hey, she's a teacher and she's giving some criticism, deal with it. Now, Rose Minetti, who's the school superintendent, said that an investigation was opened after a meeting with Alyssa and the Valley View School District, but cautioned that the outcome would be dictated by the facts and evidence rather than the social media.
Well, good. I mean, nobody should pay much attention to social media anyway. But however, again, notice this. Notice that these progressive types, they're going to fire you because you hurt somebody's feelings. Okay, they're going to fire you for that. But meanwhile, where is the parental outrage demanding firings over the kinds of things they're not teaching kids? Mm-hmm. The fact that our kids can't clearly read at grade level, do math. Look at the NAEP scores. Can't do math, can't read at grade levels. No one seems to be outraged about that. And no one seems to be outraged that when it comes to treating those little kids as adults, when it comes to sex, that's okay too. We're not going to fire anybody for that. But hey, and I love the article also pointed out that a red pen was used.
Oh, of course.
Right? Oh, this was written in red ink. As if somehow it had been written in indigo, right? Ink. That would have made it better. The war on red ink is something that I've been experiencing. I actually have college, almost always education majors,
of course,
right? Who come up to me and they get mad that I'm using red pen. Don't you know, Dr. Pesta, that red pen is it's like using caps when you email. You're yelling at me. Okay, right. Well, of course I ignore that. And in fact, I got bought stock in red pens.
And just a reminder to you wonderful folks out there, our show grows because of all of you. So please continue to spread the word on the Dr. Duke Show by liking, commenting, and sharing each and every episode on whatever platform you prefer, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. And don't forget the audio podcast makes for a great listen on that morning commute or when you just want to hear these golden pipes. We're on iTunes and everywhere else. So please, please, please subscribe. All right, well, somehow I'm going to segue that into the Ilhan Omar story we have, because some Minneapolis public schools are now using like coloring pictures or coloring books of Ilhan Omar. So in Ilhan Omar is from Minnesota, and she is a freshman in the House, in case you didn't know who she is. I can't believe you wouldn't by this point. But anyway, students at the public schools are making the students actually color photos of her and looking all stoic. And then the students have to open the paper and write a report about her. Now, when I was in elementary school, when I was in junior high, when I was in high school, I never, ever had to write anything or color anything about my freshman House representative for our district. It's just, you don't do that. But we have a report come out of Powerline that is claiming that Omar is being raised to heroic status in her district's public schools, and so they are doing this. Elementary school students are apparently being taught to revere her, much as, in recent years, they have been taught to see Martin Luther King Jr. as a kind of secular saint. And then the Star Tribune reported that Omar, she's only been in office for 3 months now, out of all the House members in Minnesota, she's raised the most money, $830,000 in campaign funds, and about half of that is coming from outside Minnesota. So they're elevating her as high up as they possibly can.
Yeah, and we saw last week, Easter week, we saw how Che Guevara, is being elevated to secular saint status, that they're replacing the Christian pantheon of saints with secular progressive, oftentimes anti-Semites in the case of Ilhan Omar, and it's absolutely clear she is an anti-Semite. Again, somehow for the progressives, Jewish people are the one minority group who's been the most persecuted, who, however, we're not going to treat as persecuted. We're going to persecute ourselves. And when you think about this situation here, it reminds me of Barack Obama when he became president, when you had kindergarten kids singing their creepy little Hitlerian Hitler Youth songs to Barack Obama in public schools, or the degree that when Donald Trump got elected, where you had kids being asked and polled as young as first grade, what do you think of the president? I think he's a scary guy. This is the kind of stuff that they do. And Minneapolis schools, there's a reason Minneapolis schools keep cropping up every week in our show. It's because they are some of the most absurdly progressive and embarrassingly incompetent public schools in the country.
Well, we have at least Muslim parents who are outraged, and they're standing up for what they believe. This is out of the UK. It's actually out of Hounslow, West London, where there was a group of Muslim parents who complained that one of their parents' 4-year-old children came home from school with a book about the lives of a gay couple and their son. The parents are part of this parent support group in Hounslow, And now they're objecting to the book because of the children's age. A 4-year-old coming home with this book. And the book is called Daddy's Roommate. It includes everyday scenes of men shaving together in their underwear and resting in bed. And the group is saying the content is inappropriate for young children, regardless of faith. This has nothing to do with faith. They're saying they're 4-year-olds. They should not be looking at this. And so, of course, a spokeswoman for the LGBT Muslims group slammed the statements from these parents, and they didn't name any of the parents, and they're saying that this is traditional homophobia dressed up as a faith issue.
But it is interesting to see how progressive Muslims now are beginning to turn on traditional Muslims. And so the fact that parents are standing up, and the progressive Muslim is wrong. The progressive Muslims are as wrong as the progressive educrats in England. There is no reason to expose 4-year-olds to any of this. Absolutely none. The thing that gets me, though, is the title of the book is, so they're so radical in pushing this agenda on preschoolers, basically, right? Little kids. But they don't call it what it is. They're cowards. Come on, man, sack up, UK Muslim progressives. Sack up, UK educrats. Why don't you just call it Daddy's husband instead of Daddy's roommate? I mean, if you're going to be absolutely developmentally inappropriate, if you're going to abuse little kids this way, do it transparently. Call it what it is.
Well, we also have Ezra Stripe, who's a spokesperson for Hidayah, I think that's how you say it, which says it supports and uplifts LGBT Muslims, and said it was important for even young children to understand 2 mothers or 2 fathers was normal and acceptable. I don't think teaching a kid about homosexuality will make them homosexual. I do think it's an inbuilt thing, but at the same time, more people will realize it at a younger age if they have access to information about it. Okay.
Yeah. Wait, you're asking you're having 4-year-olds access information, right? Yeah. That you're going to create tolerance by literally brainwashing kids into believing certain things that they're too young to even understand. Look, I'm not arguing you should start teaching kids about it. We've never argued. Western culture has never taught little tiny middle school kids about heterosexual sex. Never did it. Never felt the need to provide a 4-year-old with access to condom information or access to how mommy and daddy sleep in the same bed. And they're really not wrestling, Junior. We never used to do that, but now we got to do it because the special interest group says so.
This isn't just a West London instance, and this is the entire UK, and if things happen in the UK, it's going to be coming over here. The Department of Education over there said for the first time we're making relationships education. So get ready for that terminology. Relationships education. Learning how to treat each other with kindness and consideration. Compulsory in all primary schools by next year, by 2020. This will provide the building blocks for positive relationship. When the new lessons come into effect in 2020, parents will have the right to request that their child be withdrawn from sex education, but will not be able to withdraw children from relationships education.
Which is going to be primarily about sex, right?
Absolutely.
Over and over again, the relationship curriculum will become a sex curriculum, and you can't opt your kids out of it. Oh, and we're going to teach these kids not math and English and reading. We're going to teach them relationship education, which is going to come to it's already dominating the curriculum, and we're going to teach them kindness and tolerance, unless 10% of gays rebel against 5% of Muslims, right? And 0% of Christian representation. That's your kindness, tolerance, and inclusion, progressive style.
All right. Well, back here in the States, in Spokane, Washington, they are being completely exclusive to our libraries. Do you remember Library Day at school? Like every week when you got to go to the library and you got your little paint stick and you had to put it in, and when you pulled out a book so you could look and see what books you wanted to check out. It was like the best day ever.
I remember
love that day.
Mrs. Cantillon, when I picked up my Beezus and Ramona, I remember walking through the books of the library, just fascinated by them. When I was in middle school, story time, I remember that I was a 7th grader and I found a copy of The Sinking of the Bismarck, the great German battleship that was the most famous ship in the whole war. And I remember in 7th grade, I think I read it 14 times. It was exhilarating to me. It
took you that long to understand what was going on?
Yeah, exactly. You weren't there to read it to me. 14 times I must have read that book. I kept checking it out because it was absolutely exhilarating. In fact, I had a little, the game, what's the game with the submarines and the Battleship. I had a bunch of Battleship games. I was so turned on by the naval aspect of that I took the Battleship pegs, the little cruisers and destroyers, and I sawed the pegs off them, and I used to roll them around the carpet, playing Who Sunk the Bismarck. Those were the joys that the library brought me.
Wow.
See, I'm telling you.
Somehow, if I went back to that library, I bet you're the last person to have checked out.
I'm
just saying.
No, if you go back to that library, all those books have been removed, and now it's like the Battleship Bismarck has a gay cruiser boyfriend named the Battleship Hood, and they're in an exclusively gay relationship on the open seas. That's what's replaced The Sinking of the Bismarck, I'm sure, in my elementary school library now.
And if that
We
library
come back around.
exists. All right. So what happened is, and this is happening all over the country, Spokane Public Schools announced that they are eliminating their school librarians. The library is going to stay, but now the teachers have to run this library because teachers already don't, bemoan how much work and stuff they have to do. So that library is going to turn into an absolute disaster. And this pretty much mirrors what Chicago has already done, and it, across the country, it's happening more and more. Ed Week actually reported last year in 2018 that more than 9,000 school library jobs were eliminated in just this past decade because kids don't need to read whole books. I mean,
well, and as we saw when the Common Core was coming into play and some of these national standards initiatives going back to No Child Left Behind and Goals 2000 under Clinton, what we saw was actually with Common Core about 8 years ago, middle school, elementary, and high school libraries were actually taking the classics off the shelf and getting rid of them, giving them away or just having them pulped, right? And those books were not replaced. All the books that you now find in a child's library at the school are highly sociological, highly political, highly progressive books. They really literally did take the classics out of your kids' public school libraries. It's unbelievable. So I have very little sympathy here because the libraries have become places of indoctrination anyway. You're not able to read a broad range of books. The kids are being really scripted in what they're allowed to check out, number one. And number two, when you think about how absolutely progressively out of their minds library science has begun to turn out people. Think about the libraries that are having their little kindergarten transvestite reading days. It's almost impossible to believe, but perhaps graduates of library study programs are even more mindlessly radical than education majors. So, from that perspective, one less radical liberal supervising and censoring what kids read, I can live with it.
I'm on the fence on this because obviously
you have a degree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but libraries are near and dear to my heart. But to your point about the library science degrees, because you have to get a master's in library science to be a librarian, most of those students' undergrad degrees, do you know what they were in? English.
There you go.
Which sociology. That's so. It's the people who can't find a job. Well, okay, I'll go work at a library. Okay,
That's
I have
right.
to go get a library science degree. But Stephanie Oakes is the Spokane school librarian, and she's also a young adult lit author. And I like how she put it. At least, maybe she can only really speak for herself, and hopefully this is true. She says the district may not value or understand what I do as a school librarian, but the students sure do. More than anything, I'm devastated for them. They deserve so much better, which is true. All students deserve so much better than what they're getting in their school system right now. And hopefully, maybe she was one of those. I'd like to think
you're an optimist. I'm a pessimist. I would want to ask, where was Mrs. Oakes when the school was yanking out all those classics in favor of probably your little self-help progressive screeds that you write? I don't like to see anybody lose their jobs. But again, when you think about the degree to which library science and how libraries have been run, particularly in public schools, over the last 5 to 10 years, it doesn't seem to me that this is a great tragic loss for those kids.
Well, in the past, at least, according to research by Keith Curry Lance and Deborah E. Catchell, they found that data from more than 34 statewide studies suggest students tend to earn better standardized test scores in schools. And isn't that what their education is supposed to be about? If they have a strong library program. So now the kids are still expected to have high standardized tests and no library program. And they're saying that if you have a good library, they found higher graduation rates, mastery of academic standards. But that's all gone out the window.
I'd like to know what strong library programs mean to the left. They don't mean what you and I think. Look, I just told you my story. If this strong libraries mean exposing kids to all sorts of really interesting books from diverse perspectives, do it. That's not the library programs we're talking about today.
All right. Well, libraries are also promoting white supremacy, so that's why they must go. We have the Library Journal, and it's this, big organization, and they're on the Twitter, and they tweeted out that indeed libraries are places of white supremacy. The tweet said, library collections continue to promote and proliferate whiteness with their very existence and the fact that they are physically taking up space in our libraries. And this tweet was actually part of a quote that came from a blog entry by an academic librarian, Sophia Long, who works for MIT, and her interests include intersectional feminism, social justice, and critical race theory.
So, in other words, everything but libraries.
And cats and whiskey.
Oh, there you go. Cats and whiskey.
Cats and whiskey.
Look, let me hop in here. Thank you for having the story next, because it just verified what I said about library science programs. Do you understand what's happening here? The fact that many of the books in traditional libraries were written by white people. The hard reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that Native American culture did not have a written literary tradition until Europeans gave it to them. Many African cultures, this is not an insult, this is not a hostility, this is simply the truth. Many African cultures, for instance, were oral cultures, they were not written cultures. Libraries were constructed in the West by Western culture, people of Western culture. And so consequently, the fact that there are, and notice the animosity here, that these books, right, are actually white men standing on the shelves, towering over the lesser books, dominating them. This is not about books. This is not about the love of learning. This is about prejudice, right? There are too many white books, too many ideas from white men, too many libraries with too many white perspectives. And so we're not going to balance that out or encourage young minority kids to write and fill up libraries. We must take down these monuments to whiteness.
Yeah, it's exactly what she says. The blog is called Whiteness as Collections, and she laments, if you look at any United States library's collection, especially those in higher education institutions, most of the collections, which are books, journals, archival papers, other media, are written by white dudes writing about white ideas, white things, or ideas, people, and things that they stole from persons of color.
So, the only meaningful things white people have written are things they stole from people of color. And she dismissively calls them white dudes. So again, this is nothing more than unmasked discrimination. It's bigotry. It's stereotyping. It's scapegoating. It's cowardly. And ask yourself, Miss Librarian, how much of where you stand, the world you stand on at MIT, which is a white man's university, it's not only just a white person's university, it's a white person's university dedicated to technology, which is a white guy kind of thing, right, in this culture. And you're standing there as a tenurable professor, right, who's going to get tenure and never be able to be fired in the context of this, and your whole gripe is what is against everything that gave you that platform. No gratitude, no ability to see. And so go back again. Let me ask you now that we've wound this down. You still sympathetic to library science programs?
No, not at the college level, but the little elementary kids that hope and spark. When you were in third grade and were reading Beezus and Ramona.
Beezus and Ramona.
Can't believe you
read that.
read that.
A long time ago.
That's the best. Anyway, one more thing on this, because why not? She also said that the collections are paid for using money that was usually ill-gotten and at the cost of black and brown lives via the prison industrial complex, the spoils of war, etc.
And you understand what she just said here, that white culture is inviolate. How do we get around the argument, the absolute historical argument that I just made, that white people, I wouldn't even define, I don't consider Aristotle or Kierkegaard or Hannibal necessarily white people, but you do. You're the ones on the left who any aspect of the huge diversity that Western culture represents, right? English, Swedes, ancient Greeks, ancient Romans, it doesn't matter to you, they're all just white guys in your absolute contempt for anything Western culture. But the fact is that everything that they have achieved, the major achievements, you can't argue historically against them. So what do? You say they must be invalidated because everything that was done by these white cultures was stolen from people of color, which you know is absolute bull. But that's your argument, right? We're not even going to let kids choose for themselves. We're not even going to let the library books stand in the library. We're going to remove them. So every trace of this culture, the culture that gave you your liberties, your freedoms, your wealth, your independence, the university system that you now are predatorily taking on, everything that was given to you was given to you by the people who wrote those books, and you're going to get rid of those books. And you think when you get rid of the foundation, you're going to have something to stand on. You're not, honey.
She's just going to lose her job, because what is she going to do now?
Like the middle school and high school librarians are, right? Yeah. Exactly. Oh, and by the way, way to go, MIT. Way to go, one of our premier statistical and technology colleges. That evidently there aren't enough women like her doing actual science for you to hire. So how do you get your quota of women up at MIT? Well, you make them librarians, and they immediately start deconstructing your entire technological system. Way to go, MIT.
Just wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. All right, well, let's go to Colorado, which is having a sex ed bill that would force kids to learn the LGBT ideology. But you can't talk about abstinence?
Yeah, this is a big, big deal, and it's one I'm proud to say and dismayed to say we've said was coming for a long time. We pointed out to you a number of times on this show that what's happened in terms of sexuality is this. Back in the 80s when we had Ronald Reagan and we had the don't ask, don't tell policies, we had the just say no program. We also had abstinence-only education. That in the 80s, we would teach kids in the public schools the biology of sex, sperm and egg, birds and bees, but we wouldn't teach them morality, we wouldn't teach them the politics of sex, we wouldn't sexualize them at young ages. That was a wonderful tradition. Let the parents do it. The progressive educrats rebelled against that, and for 40 years they've been planning exactly what you're seeing here, to not only to get rid of abstinence-only education, but to replace it with radical sexual comprehensive education, which we've documented on this show already numerous times, and the show's going back since we started this show. Every week there's been one of these stories. What they wanted to do is not only get rid of abstinence education, they wanted to make abstinence not possible. Abstinence is the only way to guarantee you don't contract a sexually transmitted disease. It's the only way to avoid the worst aspects of what happens with random sexuality. And now you're not even potentially allowed to mention it. Colorado's sex ed bill would force kids not only to learn LGBTQ ideology, and by that, I just don't mean the mechanics of homosexuality, but ideology, right? This is proactive politics. They will force kids in Colorado to learn that, and they will ban, B-A-N, prohibit any mention of the word abstinence. This wildly controversial comprehensive sex education legislation has ignited national discussions about how far Americans want to expose their children to radical social agendas. This is Colorado Bill HB 1032. It would specifically prohibit religious, moral, and ethical perspectives on sex from even being discussed in the classroom. So if we're teaching to your 5-year-olds transgenderism, you no longer have, as the parent, the right to protest on ethical, moral, or religious grounds, and teachers no longer have the ability to protest on ethical, moral, and religious grounds at all. They simply have to do it. The bill forbids any emphasis on abstinence, forbids it, and sexual risk avoidance. You can't do that either. And the bill even declares that saying so in the classroom is against the law. That legally, if you mention that abstinence is a way to avoid guaranteed pregnancy and unwanted sexual transmission, to mention that could make you a criminal.
The fact that they are so absolute that there are no moral absolutes is just astounding, but it's what we've been seeing, over and over. And the thing is, the Colorado bill, it already passed the House, and it's now already in a Senate committee, and so it's gotten through several stages. It's halfway there. So if you think, this will never pass, it's halfway there, and it's going to pass.
By the way, the governor of Colorado is openly homosexual. Yeah. It's going to pass. Yeah. And they're going to criminalize the ability to talk about abstinence. This is going to happen in Colorado.
Well, yeah. There are going to be students, though, hopefully, fingers crossed, me the optimist, that there are going to be students who are like, well, what if you just don't have sex? Or, maybe they don't know abstinence as the term, but what's the teacher supposed to do then? If you're not allowed to mention it, are they just supposed to go ask your parents? Or
yep. Literally, if a kid brings up abstinence, she's got to talk about sex. Right? We don't use that word in this classroom. You're going to have to punish the kids. Look, if it's illegal to mention it in the classroom, it's got to be illegal for the kids, not just the teachers, right? Yeah. And one more thing about this from my perspective, this is really, really radical when you think about it, what they're doing here, but it's also, it's inconsistent, typically progressively inconsistent. The reason for putting all of this transgender sex, all of this homosexuality, all of this sexual promiscuity, the reason for doing it, according to the left, is moral. It's not educational. Right? It's in the name of tolerance and kindness, right? These are moral values. And so they're moral values, right? Yeah. So in the name of morality, our morality, we forced our morality on your kids. If you want to object on a moral basis, you can't now. If you want to use religion or common sense or human decency or science to protest all of this, well, then your morality is banned.
And California and Louisiana are already the two states in the union that prohibit schools from talking about religious beliefs regarding sex, and a majority of states, in Colorado currently, which isn't going to be for long, they do allow abstinence to be stressed or emphasized to teens as the only foolproof method. But we're seeing that it's if Colorado's going to flip, who's next? It's just going to come down.
Yeah, it is impossible now to argue that states have real autonomy over this. This is what at the national level is being pushed. This is what bureaucrats at the Department of Education want, right? Regardless of what Betsy DeVos thinks. The entire structure, the academic community, and when it comes to pedagogy for little kids, has gone complete 100% social justice rogue. They're not going to leave your state alone until it happens. And look, if you think it's only going to happen in California, Massachusetts, happening in Colorado. Even a state like Louisiana, God bless them, which is as arguably conservative state as we have in the country, is arguing that you can't use religion to justify not participating in the sexuality curriculum.
Yeah, and currently we have Arizona, Massachusetts, and Texas fighting pretty much similar things to what Colorado's doing. Tennessee, Alaska, Idaho, and other states are taking some proactive measures to ensure family values, but what's happening in your state, you need to look at it yourself.
Texas and Arizona. Texas is grappling with this issue now. So if nothing is done real quick to push back against this, parents, within 15 years, this will be in every school at every grade level.
And if you think it's not happening in maybe in the big cities, maybe that's happening, but not in my little hometown community. Well, we have a story from Michigan, okay? Michigan, good Midwestern state. Allendale, Michigan, population 26,000, okay? So this is a smaller type city. For 8 years, they've offered a sex ed program titled Willing to Wait, all right? And it holds fast to the benefits of abstaining from sex until marriage, and it doesn't address any issues of gender or gender identity. In all those 8 years, they've had 0 complaints, 100%, parent satisfaction as to what's happening. But last spring, parents found out that the teacher, Tiffany Harp, was discussing gender identity in her family and relationships class, and a heated debate arose about, changing the sex ed curriculum to include all the LGBTQ plus stuff, and they wanted a stronger emphasis on scientific discussions of sex and sexuality. Well, there was a 29-page complaint that was written to the school board from a abstinence focus group called CAST, Conservatives of Allendale Stand Together. So it's a family group, a parent group that got together. 29-page complaint they put to the school board, and basically they said, absolutely not. We have a 100% approval rate. Our parents should be the ones teaching our children, not this teacher.
And so it's coming.
It's coming.
I guarantee you, at the superintendent level, at the state level, these poor people in Allendale are going to lose this battle, right? They're going to lose it. Is that Allendale?
Allendale.
Yeah, they're going to lose this battle because this is the way you will be seen as retrograde by doing this. This is exactly the kind of education we had in the 1980s, right? And I explained to you at the opening of this segment how that's exactly what's at war here. This is really a frustrating thing because these moms have exactly the right idea. And please explain to me, why are your kids in public school taking a family and relationships class? Would that time not be better spent on a little remedial math, on a little remedial English reading? What I'm trying to suggest to you, again, Mom and Dad, is this is where it's going. I'm predicting within 25 years, you're not going to be teaching English reading and math in classes anymore. All those things are going to be filtered through social justice lenses, right? So reading for contemporary civilization, math for the workplace, or math for social justice is what you're going to get. Very low on math, very high on politics. Very low on reading, no more reading at an 11th grade reading level when you're in 3rd grade. That's not going to be happening anymore. No more teachers telling you, put the kids' book down and read an adult book. It's going to be everything filtered through this now. This is where you're headed. If you can't see this, you've got to wake up and just go back and start watching episodes of the Dr. Duke Show, going back 1, 2, 3, 60, 70 of them now. You're going to see how far this has come in the space of a little over a year.
It's your most favoritist time of the week. Let's get to the extra credit. This week, sponsored by Art is Dead. And I know this is true because at a Chicago area middle school, a 1930s mural had to be removed since it depicted only white people ice skating on a park pond. The Julian Middle School in Oak Park had students and parents complain about the 1937 mural by Ethel Spears, which was created through the Works Progress Administration. Since the mural does not reflect the diversity of the student body, school, or community, it had to go. Now the school's Social Justice Club is coming up with ideas for the mural's replacement. The fact, though, that a middle school has a social justice club indicates education in, say, I don't know, history may not be a top priority.
I've warned you, within 2 school years, it's going to be illegal to read any book in public school that is only written by a white person. That any book that is only written by a white person or written about white culture, it's not going to be inclusive enough. Mark my words, that day is coming quick.
On the college campus, we have a feminist professor encouraging students to draw themselves naked. At Towson University, in Lillian Carter's Sexuality in Diverse Societies class, Carter has denied her students from doing a pro-life class project, but has encouraged students to support Planned Parenthood, draw themselves naked, and share their pictures with the class. Other assignments have included making a list of things that sexually arouse the students and developing alternative names for genitalia and various sexual acts. And then Carter encourages students to masturbate. So, my friends, that's our tax dollars and up to $23,000 per year for that education.
Start with you, Professor.
At another university, we have kids literally shaking. When students at Taylor University, a Christian university, found out that Vice President Mike Pence will be this year's commencement speaker, they immediately began a petition to stop him. A female student claimed she was physically ill by the email that was sent announcing Pence as the speaker. She said, "I am physically shaking. The fact that the school who claims to love and support me and each of its students and alum would invite such a vile individual to speak on the most important day of the year? False. The best day of the year is the very next day when she will no longer be on campus."
Ma and Da, if you're listening to me, here's the thing. If you're paying tens of thousands of dollars to send your kids to a Christian university where the Christian student body is protesting Mike Pence because he's an actual Christian, you maybe want to think about a better place to spend your money.
Kids can stop their shaking because if Elizabeth Warren has it her way, those kids won't have to worry about paying back any of their school loans. Presidential candidate and perennial 1/1024th Native American Warren proposed that we should use taxpayer money to cancel a one-time cost of $640 billion in college debt. And then she wants a universal free college program that just costs $1.25 trillion over 10 years. Every student will also get a personalized unicorn to ride to class.
I'll make a deal with you, Lizzie that dances with idiots. Here's the thing. If you're going to give kids who took out loans to get a college degree, you're going to give them that money back. You're going to waive that debt. Then all of us who didn't take out any student loans at all to pay for their school, that would include me and Katie, give us the same amount of the loans in actual income.
Let's end this week on a happy note. A few weeks ago, we reported how Long Island 6th grader Bella Moscato was not allowed to choose President Donald Trump as her hero for a project at school. But she was told by her teacher that, Barack Obama could be chosen. The girl was rightfully confused and upset. Well, word got out and made its way to the White House of what happened, and President Trump sent Bella a care package of White House goodies and a letter that said, "I am proud of you for standing up for yourself. Everyone deserves to receive the same care and respect we give ourselves. I encourage you to always be yourself and keep making your voice heard." Good on Trump.
Good on Trump, good on Bella, good on the mom and dad who raised Bella, good on everyone who's pointed out there how hypocritical and crazy these public schools are. Way to go.
And that's your extra credit for the week. Now, if you have any stories you'd like to suggest, go ahead, type them down below, right there in the comment section. And then make sure you hit that like button and share the episode. And don't forget, please subscribe to the Dr. Duke Show audio podcast on iTunes and leave us that coveted 5-star review.
And that does it for us this week on the Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you've heard, please share the video and podcast with your friends. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. We'll see you next time.